Now, chapter 11 is quite a long chapter, so we're going to split that into two. And it's called The Monkeys and the Bees. Jungles, Fred found, were full of corners and crannies that held secrets. But the secrets emerged in the most unexpected ways. They would never, he thought, have found the scrap of paper that changed everything if it hadn't been for the joint efforts of the monkeys and the ants and the bees. Max saw them first, later that afternoon. He'd been lying on his back, staring at the sky, while Leela and Con and Fred sat by the fire and tried to make a plan. The problem was, despite being told very firmly to stay put, Max kept trying to explore, and he was a small 5-year-old in a very large jungle. "How sure are you that the raft will hold?" Leela asked. Fred considered. The raft was wide and strong, and the vines were wrapped so thickly to secure it that the raft was more green than brown. It looked like a rectangular floating cricket pitch. But, he thought, the pilot had presumably been just as certain about the plane. Medium sure, he saw Con's face. High medium. And walking would take weeks, he said. "We know Manaus is on the Amazon, so if we sail downriver we should reach it." Max approached and sat on Leela's feet, tugging at her sock. "Leela." He dug a chunk of snot from his nose and wiped it on the grass. "Except we don't know if Manaus is upriver or downriver from here," said Con, "so we have a 50% chance of death." "Leela," said Max, "listen to me." "But there's a 50% chance of life," said Fred. Con smirked, and he resisted the urge to flick Max's snot at her. "Can you hear yourself?" she said. "Do you know how insane that sounds?" "Leela," Max tugged harder at her sock. Did you see how the monkeys fought the bees?" "What do you mean?" said Leela. Backer had taken up a position draped across one of her shoulders, back legs hooked under her armpit. He looked, Fred thought, like the epaulets on his father's old army uniform. "The monkeys won," said Max. "I followed them." "Max, what are you talking about?" Leela picked him up and held his face close to hers, blazingly angry. "I thought you were in the den. You know you're not allowed to move. I told you. If I can't trust you, I'm going to tie you to me." Max pouted. "I didn't go far. I stayed away because I don't like bees." "Maxie, don't lie. There are no bees," said Leela. "I've seen every flying thing, ants and beetles and mosquitoes, but no bees." "It was over there," said Max. He pointed to the other side of the clearing, among tall rubber trees. "In the high bits." Leela raised her eyebrows over Max's head. "Was this a dream, Max, or in real life?" "Real life," said Max. "I don't believe you." "Real life!" Max looked furious. "Real life! The monkeys washed their hands in the ants, and then they fought the bees." "I have no idea what you're trying to describe," said Con, "but it sounds terrifying." Max got up, roared, and stamped, accidentally stepping on Con's knuckles. Con gave a yell and slapped at his ankles. "That hurt," she said. "Don't hit him," said Leela. "You're not paying attention, any of you," said Max. "Listen." Fred looked at Max. The boy's eyes were unhappy and a little wild. "We are listening, Max," he said. "No, come." Max took hold of Con's hand and pulled her up and towards the trees, his small feet thumping determinedly into the earth. Con looked surprised, but let herself be led, jogging beside him. She didn't comment on the state of Max's hand, which was sticky with unknown substances. Fred and Leela ran after them. "There," said Max. "They were there." He pointed up at an ant nest, a great bulbous structure built on the tree's trunk, bulging out of it like a pot belly. There were no monkeys in sight. "They were here really soon ago," said Max. "They'll come back." Skeptically, Fred sat down. Max sat on Leela's legs. Backer clung to Leela's shirt. Sitting still and empty-handed was not, Fred found, an easy thing to do. The things he was trying so hard not to think about, his father's face, his mother's voice, came crowding in, and darker things, the picture of all four of them starving, unfound in the green clearing, crept towards him. He tried to whistle, but his head swam, and he succeeded only in making a peculiar piping noise. "Fred," whispered Leela, "you'll scare the monkeys." And then, suddenly, the monkeys came. There were 3 of them, dark brown and strong-limbed and sweet-faced. Fred watched in awe as they chased one another up and down the trees, chittering. They whirligigged around the trees, flicking their tails, and then the largest of the monkeys, a mother with a baby hanging from her neck, laid her paws on the ant nest. The ants swarmed over the monkey's paws and up her arms until her fur was black with them. Then, fast before the ants could bite, the monkey rubbed her paws together. Con touched Fred's sleeve. "Is she killing the ants?" Fred watched the monkey lower her nose to her paws and sniff deeply. "It's like a perfume, or a sort of drug," he said. Suddenly all 3 monkeys, as if at a signal, turned and leapt across away from the trees. "Let's follow them," said Leela. It isn't easy to keep pace with monkeys if you don't happen to be one yourself, and if you haven't eaten properly for days. They were all 4 weak, and Leela's hands were shaking. Con turned pale as they jogged after the monkeys' disappearing backs. The monkeys leapt into the branches of the great spreading rubber trees and halted. "Bees," said Max in a self-satisfied voice. "I told you." Far above their heads, so far it was blurred with distance, was a beehive. It was enormous, encased in a grey layer of resin, and the buzzing was astonishingly loud. Honey ran down the side of the tree. Leela's eyes widened. She held back more tightly. "They don't attack sloths, do they?" As they watched, the mother monkey approached the hive, broke open the protective layer, and plunged her paws into its depths. She broke off a piece of honeycomb and bit into it, dripping honey on her baby's head. The bees swarmed furiously, but didn't go close enough to sting. Leela's eyes were as wide as the sun. "I think the smell on her paws meant that the bees didn't attack," she said. "It must be a repellent." "Let's try it," said Fred, already on his feet. "But what if it only works for monkeys?" said Con. "Well, there's only one way to find out." He thought of dinner, which would be pineapples, if there were any left, and cocoa grubs, if there weren't. "Wouldn't you like some honey?" "Just think for a minute before you—" But Fred was already running. He wound his way back to the ants' nests and waited, panting for the others to catch up. Then he laid his hand on its side. The ants swarmed onto his fingers and knuckles and wrists. It was like wearing a pair of black gloves. "They tickle," he said. The ants were so small it was like being covered in full stops. "Now rub your hands," ordered Max. Quickly, like the monkeys." A few of the ants swarmed up Fred's arms all the way up to his chin, but they didn't seem disposed to bite. He rubbed his hands together, feeling a little guilty, and then sniffed. The smell was so strong that he gagged. "You know when they put stuff on cuts at school," he said. "It's like that." "Disinfectant?" said Leela. He rubbed his hands over his face, as he'd seen the monkeys do, and up his arms. He hesitated, and then gathered more ants and rubbed the smell onto his legs and ankles too, just in case. Con pulled his hand down to her face so she could sniff. "It smells like ammonia," she said, "like my aunt's smelling salts." They ran back to the honey tree. Fred thought the others seemed to be giving him a wider berth than usual. "You smell like a bad idea," said Max. "Like medicine." At the foot of the tree, Fred looked up. The trunk was enormous, and the bees a distant cloud. "Are you sure you don't want to stop to think for just one single second? To at least make a plan?" said Con. "I'll be fine," said Fred. He'd always loved climbing trees, that feeling of navigating an unknown land upwards. The others watched him. Leela with expectant eyes, Con with one eyebrow and her upper lip raised, Max with his finger in his nose. He seized a low branch and heaved himself up. Max cheered. Fred's legs scrambled for purchase, and then found a knot in the bark and pushed upwards. He felt immediately that this was different. This was nothing like climbing at home. His muscles were weak and less at his command. His arms and legs had less pull and spring to them. It occurred to him, with a jolt, that he hadn't checked to see if the tree's wood was rotten. The tree creaked under him, loud as the hinge on a giant's gate. "Doe!" he whispered very quietly. He reached up for the next branch, and then the next. his shoes slipping and sliding on the smoothness of the bark. "Oh, for goodness sake," he heard Con say. "He's going to get himself killed." "He'll be all right," said Leela. "Really." "Well, if he's not, though, it'll be even harder stuck in this place with just 3 of us." "Fred!" she called. "Please, just come down." Fred ignored her. He swung higher and faster. He set both feet on a thick branch and looked above his head for a good handhold. Suddenly, the branch under his feet snapped. His legs flailed in the air, kicking against the trunk of the tree, and he swung from his hands, feeling his fingers slip against the slick surface. He scrambled with his right hand for another branch, his legs blindly seeking a foothold. His feet met a solid wood again. He tried to pull up to the next handhold, but his arms felt hollow, no more use than straw or wool. He stood on a knot in the trunk, clutching at the branch above his head, frozen. He tried not to think of what his father's face would look like if he heard that his son had died climbing a tree. "Look at him," said Con below. "He's stuck." "Are you all right?" called Leela. "He's obviously not," said Con, "and I'm not going to stand here and watch him die." And we'll continue this chapter tomorrow.